anyway, guys, without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker this week, Dennis Halchin with
Ad Hoc Press.
Ad Hoc Press. Thank you. Based in Nashville, he is a speaker and author, and this is his book, The Achievement Protocol, which is available online, Amazon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to speak with us a little bit. He's a one I've heard good things, so I'm very excited to listen in. So, guys, give him a round of applause. Dennis Halchin.
All right. Thank you. Well, I'm okay. This is probably the most beautiful time of year in Nashville. Does everybody agree? Summer is kind of a bear, but we're done with summer now. How many of you actually did something new this summer, went someplace new? A lot of you did. Great. Well, my wife and I, we went someplace that we'd never been before. We went to New Orleans, and we stayed at the Hotel Monteleone. Has anybody heard of the Hotel Monteleone? That's a wonderful story that I'm going to save for another time, but in 1880s, a man named Antonio Monteleone came over from Sicily. He was a shoemaker, and he came and he set up shop in New Orleans on Royal Street, and after running his shoemaking business for a while, he decided to buy this hotel, and he built the Hotel Monteleone, and it's been in business ever since, and it's still run by his family. So he's got a great story that needs to be told. But I'm not going to talk about that today. We were there because it was my wife and I 40th wedding anniversary. And on our anniversary, we have something that we do. It's not the only night of the year that we do it, but it's one of the few nights that we do it. And we get together, we go out for a nice dinner. I usually have steak, and she has seafood or some kind of fishy smelling thing. But we talk, and we talk about the year that's gone by and the year that's coming up ahead, and we talk about our goals, and more importantly about our plans to reach those goals. And that has been a tradition that we've had ever since we were married 40 years ago, and it's worked out really well for all of us. Now, how many people here are native Nashvillagers? Got a couple, good. How many are native Tennesseans? One or two more, okay.
I'm that too.
Wonderful. So I'm a transplant, like most of the people in the room. I came here from California. I lived in Chico, California, and in 2014, my wife and I had our 35th wedding anniversary, and we were sitting and talking, and it turned out that we were actually in a different phase of our life. A lot of our goals had been completed. A lot of things had converged. Our youngest daughter was in her last year of college, and she already had her game plan set for what she was going to do when she got out of college. Our two sons were already successful running their businesses and doing the things that they were going to do for the rest of their lives. And so we thought about the position that we were in and what the future might hold in store for it. And we decided that this was a new phase of our life, and we could actually do it any place in the world. At this time, I was celebrating the 20th anniversary of owning my own business. So I'd been self-employed since 1994. I did smart things with money, like some of you teach about. That's a great thing. And so we were set, and we knew that we could choose to live any place we want and do our next phase. And my next phase was going to be in writing and speaking and talking to people. And so we looked around, and my first go-to place was Hawaii, because we'd visited Hawaii many, many times over the years, taken our family there, and And we had our special places on the Big Island mostly that we really love about Hawaii. And I'd always kind of had in the back of my mind it'd be lovely to have a coffee plantation. I'd like to have a little coffee farm. But taking us out to Hawaii would take us too far away from some friends and some family that we didn't really want to be that far away from. So we decided to focus on the mainland. And I looked in Arizona, where I grew up, and I looked at land in Colorado and in Idaho. And there's just a lot of beautiful places in America where you can go to live. We looked in Florida, and we didn't find anything there's a lot about Florida that we didn't like, but we weren't compelled. And then the one place that I didn't look was Tennessee. I know there was no allure from Tennessee for me, or so I thought, until a friend who had lived here for a couple of years came up, and he invited me to come out and take a look at the Nashville area since I'm thinking about moving. Just give it a shot and see what I think about it. And so we did. I came out, and I really liked the downtown area of Tennessee, of Nashville. I won't say I loved it. I would have loved it 20 years younger, but I liked the Nashville area. But I really, really loved all of the ranches and the farm and the agriculture that's all around Nashville. And I liked the countryside, and there were just so many things. I spent a lot of time driving on 24 and 65. So I said to myself, I looked at the traffic and I said, gosh, does it get any better than this? And you know, 5 years later, I don't think it does. But Nashville, I found, is not the worst place in the world to drive. How many of you have driven in Europe? Lots of you. Good. So you know what I'm talking about. If you're driving in Italy, they've got really nice superhighways. And everybody on the superhighway drives just like Mario Andretti. So you got to be on your toes, but you can get around pretty good in Italy until you get off the highway. When you get into the towns, the geniuses there decided that it would be a great idea to make all of the roads 75% of the width of your car. So no matter what you were driving, one wheel was always going to be up on a sidewalk. And then everybody parks, of course, their motorcycles on the street, and it makes for a harrowing experience, to say the least. But at least they tried to drive like Mario Andretti on those streets, but they could never get up any kind of speed. So driving through Europe, though, was eye-opening, because we saw a lot of the world that you just don't see if you stay in America, and we got a lot of new experiences. We drove through 7 countries, 8 if you count Liechtenstein, but nobody ever does. And when we were driving through the Alps, we stayed at a little hamlet called Arbonne on Lake Constance in Switzerland. Now, Lake Constance is this big, beautiful lake, and on the south shore of the lake is Switzerland, and on the north shore it's Germany. And over on the eastern edge of the lake, it's Austria. So the borders of all of these countries converge in the middle of this lake. And it's just an idyllic scene. But Arbonne is about 4 hours south of Mainz, Germany. And Mainz, Germany is where our story begins. Does everybody have one of these? Is there anybody that does not have one of these? Let me hand this to you. All right, this has dual purposes. This is first a mnemonic device to help you remember. I'm going to be talking about the one thing that allows us to convert a life that might be mired in miserable mediocrity into a life that is fantastic and a phenomenal success marked by achievement. And there's only one thing, and a lot of people don't realize how simple this one thing is that makes the difference between living that miserable life of mediocrity and living a successful life of achievement. It doesn't have anything to do with how you look. It doesn't have anything to do with your intelligence, how smart you are, how quick-witted you are. None of that matters. If you look at all of those attributes, you'll see successful people, they all have a wide range of those attitudes. But the one thing that matters is attitude. And specifically, I've identified 6 attitudes, which I call the attitudes of achievement. And these attitudes, the 6 in particular, are held by every person who's ever achieved anything of any quality. Anybody who's been successful, whether they've been rich or not, that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about successful achievement. I'm talking about people that have achieved great things, lived a significant life. And the person I'm going to talk about today is Johannes Gensfleisch, who was born in Mainz, Germany, which is just outside of Frankfurt. In 1395, Johannes was born into a family of merchants. His grandfather was a merchant, his father was a merchant. They all sold things. They were all businessmen, not unlike some of the people in this room. But Johannes was not a businessman. Still, because he was born to a family of merchants, he was told, you're going to work in the store, you're going to, do what we do, and eventually you're going to take over. But he wasn't wired that way, so he became pretty unhappy with it. And by the time he was in his early 20s, he said, I can't do this anymore. I don't like taking inventory. I don't like counting numbers. I'm not an accountant. But he liked working with his hands, so he became an apprentice goldsmith. And he made very fine jewelry, and he had a knack for that and for science and metals in general. He didn't only do goldsmithing, he was also a very good silversmith and a blacksmith. He worked with iron, he made machinery. He was really good at making useful things that people could use. But most of his time was spent in working with fine gold and making, fine jewelry and that sort of thing. Well, Germany was unsettled at that point in time, and when he was about 33 years old, he had there was an uprising in the town of Mainz, and the craftsmen revolted against the nobility. Well, unfortunately, although he was a craftsman, his family was part of the nobility. So they were chased out of town. They literally were exiled, and they had to move down about 135 miles south into France, into Strasbourg. So his life was completely upended at that point. He'd been a goldsmith for 10 years and thought that that's what he was going to do for the rest of his life. But he got to Strasbourg, and he didn't have any of his tools. He didn't have any of his equipment or his assets, so he had to start all over. And he met some people that made him take an interest in printing. Now, printing at that time was in a pretty sad state. Printing used blocks of wood, and the printer would take and carve out the white space around all of the graphics, carve out the white space around the letters, the white space inside the letters. A very meticulous, detailed work, and they had to do that all in mirror image, so that they were, writing reverse. Now, I can't even type out a 20-word text without screwing up the spelling. Can you imagine if you had to carve it into a wood block in a mirror image? That must have been tough work. And Johannes thought it was pretty tough too. And he liked printing. He liked the idea of getting ideas onto paper, but he wasn't so thrilled about the process, so he started thinking about how he might be able to apply his skills. And so he began working on, instead of carving everything into a single block of wood, he made metal letters, each individual letter, and he made, you know, boxes full of them so that you could arrange these letters in a rack, and he made the rack, and he made the mechanism that allowed the paper to come down and smack that rack real fast and print the image on it. So it was no longer a tedious process, and he could print, you know, hundreds and hundreds of pages in the same amount of time, where it might take another printer the time to print, you know, 7 or 8 pages. So he was very ingenious. Well, in mines at this time, things had settled down, and his family decided they would move back. So he went back to mines, and he had been working for other printers during this time in Strasbourg, but now he decided he's going to open up his own print shop. And he went through and he developed the everything that he needed. But again, you know, being able to do technical things is not necessarily the same as being able to run a technology-based business. And so he ended up having to borrow money from somebody else who put their name on the building as far as the printing goes. And he, rather than just leave because he didn't have another place to go where he could do what he wanted to do, he stayed on as a consultant for this company that he had first borrowed the money from, and then they took his business in response to that. Well, he took that and he worked for him, but at the same time he also built his own printing press to compete with him. That was his side hustle, so to speak. So he took and he built this printing press, and in the meantime he was also building an industry. He was teaching typographers how to use the mechanisms and the mechanical devices that he had invented and developed, and so there were lots of people that he was training and becoming associated. He was good with people, so he was able to train a lot of people, both for the original printing press that he no longer owned and for his new printing press. But again, we're talking early Middle Ages here, and Germany was unsettled. The Archbishop Adolf II had some disagreements with the people that were running the city of Mainz. And so he marched in one night and sacked everything. He burned all of the printing presses, destroyed everything, that there was just nothing left, took out all of the businesses. All of the people that worked for Johannes, who by now was using his mother's maiden name of Gutenberg, all of the people that worked for him were now scattered, and they went to different parts of Europe, taking their knowledge of his process with them. And so he tried to build another business. For the third time, he tried to start over, and it didn't work out well. He was impoverished. He was in his 60s, and it was hard to move around at that age and to do the new things that he needed to do in order to build a new business. And so he, fortunately, Adolf II, who had destroyed his printing press, heard about Johannes and knew from the quality of the work that he had produced that he was a good printer. He offered him a salary position to come and work for him, and basically he worked for the rest of his life for Adolf as his the court printer. And that's how he was able to take a life that it had begun pretty miserable. It was a miserable existence, mired in mediocrity, that he was able to transform that by applying these attitudes that I have written on this sheet into a life of phenomenally successful achievement. Is there anybody here who has not heard of Johannes Gutenberg and the Gutenberg Press? Oh, you've got to do some reading. You've heard of Gutenberg Press? Yeah, yeah, that was him. Now, unfortunately, one of the problems with his business acumen was that he was no good at personal branding. So there are no works. There might be one work in existence that has his name on the page giving him credit as the printer. All of the credit always went to somebody else. And so that's one of the reasons why he didn't, get great fame and fortune while he was alive. But that doesn't make his achievement. Without his development of the printing press, there's no way the Age of Enlightenment could have happened, because the Age of Enlightenment was all about spreading ideas and people writing words. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, none of that could have been done in any volume without him. So what he understood, or I guess he understood it, was that the mind has an incredible ability to change and mold and shape the world around us. We have the power to take a miserable life, a mind-numbing mediocrity, and transform it into a fantastic life of phenomenal success. And in order to do that, we only need to apply these attitudes. Be persistent, be patient, be productive, be personable, be positive, and be performance-oriented. You've got to be ready to bring your A game, and you will be able to create a life of achievement and success. So I hope that is helpful. Now, you notice on this page that I gave you, did anybody fill out all of the blanks for what Johannes did? Nobody did. Well, if you think about that story, you'll be able to think about where these attitudes were used in the life of Johannes Gutenberg. And you can actually do this with just about anybody in history. You can see where they've been. But the most important part of that worksheet is what you do with it tonight or in the morning. All of those lines that are in italics, you can take home and in a time of quiet reflection, think about how you can apply these 6 attitudes in your life in order to help you achieve greater and achieve that phenomenal life of successful achievement.
Awesome. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.